Well, good evening. I'm glad that you're with us tonight. We're here at Grassy Valley Baptist Church on a Wednesday night, learning more about Nehemiah. And tonight we're going to be studying lesson number 3, Nehemiah surveys the walls. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've grown up watching TV, you've seen some great shows. I used to watch Gilligan's Island. I used to watch Hogan's Heroes, and I used to love the Dick Van Dyke Show. And I didn't know them by memory. I think I knew the Gilligan's Island episodes by heart, but not like my wife. My wife knows Little House on the Prairie, as well as that old game show, and I think it's coming back around, Name That Tune. But if she could name the episode of what was going to happen, or if she saw the title, or even if she just saw the first couple frames, she knew exactly what episode it was. So it was interesting to me as we'd sit down and watch Little House on the Prairie. She loves that show. And if you've ever seen the show, there was one little episode where Mr. Ingalls had bought some oxen from a man and was having a hard time paying him back. So he started working for him in the evening after he got done at the mill. He would stack seed, load it on the wagons to pay him back. And one Sunday, he takes his family out for a picnic. He was climbing a tree and slipped, and he fell trying to get a kite out of the tree. And he hurt his side really bad. Whether he broke some ribs, I don't know, but he wasn't able to work. And the man that had sold him the oxen was coming to repossess the animals. So Mr. Ingalls went to work anyway. He was going to make sure that he can get those oxen taken away. So he was having a hard time loading the bags of seed. And so his little girls who were watching saw their dad collapse and saw him struggle. They came in and started loading the bags of seed for him. Some of the townsmen, they saw what was going on, and they came over and started helping as well. And it was a heartwarming and tearjerker of an episode, but like the little girls who watched their daddy try to work to no avail, joined in to help, Nehemiah comes into a city and sees that the people need help. And so tonight, as we look at this, I want you to see some very interesting things. Let me remind you that I have notes for you that you can download from our website at the church, grassyvalley.org. You can go to the resources and click on that, and then it'll have some downloads on the right-hand side. Click on downloads, and it'll bring you to where you can download the worksheets for Nehemiah. And you want to get lesson 3. That's what we're studying tonight. Download those notes, and they're fill in the blank, and I'm going to be giving you the answers to those fill in the blanks through the PowerPoint that I'm about to show you. But first of all, I want you to see Nehemiah, his preparation to cast the vision. His preparation to cast the vision. He has inspected the walls, the gates. He's inspected the city. And guess what? He does it all at night while everyone is sleeping so that no one knows what he's doing. You know, he's not procrastinating here. I said there, he's not a procrastinator. He's an activist. He doesn't tell the people what he's doing because it really might cause some alarm. And he doesn't want to cause alarm before he's inspected the whole damage. The passage itself doesn't exactly say why, but there might be some truth to the fact that that's why he does this at night, because he doesn't want to cause alarm. And then Nehemiah waits 3 days. I love that because he's going to pray. He's going to pray for 3 days, organize his thoughts, his plans. You know, there's some that suggested that he may have used this time to rest or meet some of the leaders in the Jewish community, and he might have taken some of that time to do that. But it's my opinion that he used this time to pray and prepare his mind, his heart. You know, this is going to be a big task. Nehemiah was to prove to himself. He was going to prove himself to be a hard worker, but hard work alone will not ensure success. It must be the right work at the right time, done in the right way. That takes planning. Okay, and Nehemiah wanted to assess the situation, and before presenting his project to the officials and the people, God's work in us does not replace our responsible activity. In other words, we're called to do a work. We have to do a work. God's call in our life doesn't mean then we sit back and say, okay, God, you've got to work in, and you got to bring it all. I'll sit back and let you do the work. If you don't do it, it's all your fault. I've heard that said today. I've already talked to somebody about that. Listen, we can't sit back and let God do all the work. God has called us to do a work, and He will do it through us. So I love the way Nehemiah does, but he spends time in prayer. I like that. He goes and inspects the walls at night, doesn't cause any kind of alarm, doesn't let the people know what he's doing. He just spends time in prayer. He goes around, probably meets some people, and then he does this inspection of the walls and gates. Notice this. He inspects the walls and gates. The reality for Jerusalem was that it was in ruins, and as far as the gates were concerned, they were burned down. I mean, think about this. And I go through this with you, the Valley Gate. You know, Nehemiah starts at the Valley Gate, which is considered to be the chief gate in the Western Wall. Nehemiah started at the end. By the way, he started and ended his inspection at the same spot, okay? I want you to get that. Then he goes to the Jackal Wall. Some interpret it as the Serpent Well. Some believe it's in the southern section of Jerusalem. He goes to the Dung Gate. Or the Refuge Gate, and that's at the southern tip of the city. A common sewer ran to the Kidron Brook into the Valley of Hinnom from there. And then he goes, and I'm going to go to the next slide here, he goes to the Fountain Gate. That was on the east, near the south end of the city. The King's Pool was the next one. It's possibly the Pool of Siloam. I've got a little picture down on the right-hand side there of when my wife and I went to Israel. They think that might have been the Pool of Siloam. Nehemiah would have had to go back inside the city walls to get to this pool. The pool may have also been a type of receiving pool for the overflow of the Pool of Siloam and located outside the wall. So he goes there. Then he goes to the valley. This was the Kidron Valley, running north and south to the east of the Temple Mount. And then we go to verse 17. If you've got your Bibles, turn to Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 17. And it says, Then I said to them, you see the bad situation we're in, that Jerusalem is desolate, its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. Look at this. Nehemiah is calling them to catch the vision. Calling them to catch the vision. Nehemiah's vision wasn't as much about the walls as it was about the people inside the walls. You know, look, the walls were a means to an end. They were inanimate. They meant nothing in comparison to the fact that the people were basically in reproach. You know, I believe that we get sometimes caught up in inanimate objects as well. We turn churches are guilty of making inanimate objects or things into something that is more important than people. You know, we make programs, or we make meetings, committees, or teams more important than people. You know, we're not just to be about buildings and programs. We're to be about people. Some people get all bent out of shape if you take out the pulpit, or if you take out the pews, or you change the color of the carpet, and they get more consumed about the organ, or they get more concerned about inanimate objects than they do about the people that we're trying to minister to. Have you ever wondered why they needed walls and gates? Because there was always a threat. Because there's always a threat from not only other people outside the walls, but there's a threat from animals. There's a threat from enemies. And so Nehemiah is concerned for their safety. And I know sometimes we get, as I was talking about inanimate objects, you know, we get all bent out of shape over things like that. We shouldn't. Because it's not about the objects, it's about the people inside. And sometimes Satan uses those objects as an enemy. Sometimes he uses them as a means to divide and not unify, to cause people to argue rather than to worship together. And so Satan uses those things to divide and conquer rather than build. You know, what we should be doing is building and unifying, right? We talk about needing buildings and programs to keep people happy in our churches. But we often find out that the more money we spend on buildings and programs, we find out we have no peace. You know, we still argue, we still fight. Evidently, there's not enough money and there's never enough change, you know. But we should. We should have peace from the Lord. We are at peace with God, and we should be at peace with one another. And Christ gives us a peace that passes all understanding. We should be unified and should be united in what we're doing for the Lord. Now, in the Old Testament, God promises that if his children would do what he said, he would prosper them and he would protect them. They would live in peace with not only themselves, but with other nations. If you go back to Leviticus and write this down somewhere, Leviticus chapter 26, verses 3 through 7, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments so as to carry them out, then I shall give you the rains in their seasons, so that the land will yield its produce and the trees of the field will bear their fruit. Indeed, your threshing will last for you until grape gathering, and grape gathering will last until sowing time. You will thus eat your food to the full and live securely in your land. I shall also grant peace in the land, so that you may lie down with no one making you tremble. I shall also eliminate harmful beasts from the land, and no sword will pass through your land. But you will chase your enemies, and they will fall before you by the sword. Listen, Nehemiah was not about the walls. He was about the people. And that's what we need to be about. You know, these walls, I'm going to tell you something, church. I love Grassy Valley. But the church is not the building. God could send a natural disaster and take this building off this planet in a matter of seconds, and we would still be a church. Because we are a people, we care about people, we care about one another. That's what makes a church a church. It's about the people. But notice this. I want you to notice that Nehemiah's vision came from God and was conveyed to the people. Nehemiah's vision came from God and was conveyed to the people. Now notice something. There's a difference here between visions and dreams. There's a difference between visions and dreams. You know, dreams are man's desires. Visions come from God, and they're his desires. Dreams sometimes come to pass. Visions always come to pass. You know, dreams are driven by selfish motives. Visions are driven with others in mind. Dreams usually caught and accomplished by one person. But visions, they're given by God and accomplished through many, many people. So if you were to look at your church's ministry, if you were to look at your ministry, your personal ministry, can I ask you a question? What is it that God is doing in your life that is God ordained? What kind of ministry do you have that is God ordained? What are you doing that was started because you wanted to start it, or what are you doing that God wanted you to start? Or what are you not doing that God wants you to do? Is there a ministry maybe that God has placed in your heart and he's wanted you to do for a long time, but you just never have surrendered to do it? These people, the remnant, had been there, but no one had made any effort to change anything. They all, like every day, they saw the rubble, they saw the walls, they saw the gates burned down with fire, they lived in it, but they did nothing to change it. It wasn't because they didn't have leaders. They had elders, they had leaders, they lived there, but no one was willing to take the initiative until God sent a leader that said, hey, come, let's rebuild. Come, let's rebuild. You know, and I think a lot of churches get that way. I think they lack initiative until someone steps up and says, hey, let's rebuild. And maybe God has brought me here to Grassy Valley for such a time as this and says, you know what? It's time to rebuild. It's time to say, look, if we don't do something now, if we don't change things now, if we don't start reaching out our four walls now, this church may not be here in the next 5 years. We have to grow. We have to start bringing in younger people and middle-aged people. And yes, even older people. We have to bring all kinds of people in to reach the community, to love one another, to care for one another. And notice what else happens. There's a call to come and join. There's a call to come and join the good work. And look at verse 18, Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 18. And I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. Then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. Look, I think it's important that we, like Nehemiah, share what God has done as far as blessings are concerned. Nehemiah shared with them how God had blessed him so that he could lead them to rebuild. Have you ever just sat down and thought about all that God has done in your life to get you to the point where you are now? Have you ever stopped to think of all the blessings that he's given you, the trials to mold you, the people to encourage you, leaders that have taught you and have inspired you, just to get you to the point of doing what he's called you to do? I mean, think about what God has brought you through and all the blessings. Man, we need to be more about sharing those blessings so that we can encourage others. I can only imagine how Nehemiah must have been sharing this with all the people, how the king provided and how he brought him safety. And he gets there and, man, they're all going, this is the hand of God. That's powerful stuff. But notice this. Nehemiah shared with them the king's words. Did you get that? Nehemiah shared with them the king's words. Why don't churches have more testimony time? You ever wondered about that? Sometimes people need to hear testimonies of others to encourage them. It'll help them make it through. They need to hear the blessings of God on other people and for how and for what God has done in other people's lives. I mean, I can tell you time and time again of how God has blessed us and provided for us in times when we didn't have any other way. And there's a lot of people in churches that need to stand up and say, God has been faithful to me. Because other people need to hear that. You don't know what other people are going through at that moment, in that time. But people need to hear. We need to have more testimony time. But here's another key that I want you to get. It became their idea. It became their idea. Listen, they said, let us arise and build. It wasn't just left up to Nehemiah to command them. He laid out the blessings of God, and they joined the vision. They got involved. They rolled up their sleeves and joined the work. Everyone got involved. It wasn't just the 80-20% type mentality. I don't know if you know about that or not, where 20% of the work, 20% of the people do 80% of the work, or where 80% of the people just sit back and do nothing. Listen, everyone gets involved, which goes to show you what can be accomplished when people catch the vision and they have a mind to work. Look, church, I can lay out before you the vision that God is laying with me for this church, and we lay it out in our Discover class. We talk a little bit about our mission statement, that we're a family of people, a people of God chosen as a family, and we have a mission ahead of us, and we want to be authentic people. We want to have a passion for Christ. We want to have a passion for others, and I can lay that all out for you. But it does no good unless that vision is caught and taken to heart and says, I want that vision. I want that vision to be our vision. And then you say, yeah, this is what we need to do. Doing God's work is important, and we all need to catch that vision. It isn't Mark Martin's vision. It's God's vision for this church. I believe it really was sent from the Lord for me to say those words, that mission statement that we give to the church. Grassy Valley is a family of believers with an authentic passion for Jesus Christ and for others. And we are a family. We love one another, but we want to have a passion for Jesus, and that passion is going to be displayed in our love for others as well. Listen, God is doing work at Grassy Valley, and you can catch that vision. You can be a part of it. There's so many good things. God's already started a food pantry ministry here, and man, what a blessing that is. God is really starting to do some great things. Money's already been coming in. Food has already been coming in, and we open up tomorrow, January the 21st. I'm excited about it. Listen, God's doing great things and you can be part of it. But notice what else. Doing God's work doesn't mean opposition won't come. Now listen, that's a very important part of knowing what we need to know. Know about this, because people often think, well, if I do God's work, if I do God's ministry, I'm not going to have any problems. God's going to bless. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to be, everything's going to run smoothly. That's just not the case. Just because we do what God's called us to do doesn't mean opposition is not going to come. J. Oswald Sanders says in his book, Spiritual Leadership, he says, no leader is exempt from criticism, and his humility will nowhere be seen more clearly than in the manner in which he accepts and reacts to it. Charles Swindoll said, anyone who steps in the arena of leadership must be prepared to pay the price. That's the truth. There's going to be opposition. Whenever you step up to be a leader, someone's going to come against you. Sanballat, opposition comes to Nehemiah through Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. They knew that Nehemiah had permission from the king, but they tried to stop the work. They tried to dishearten the people. They ridiculed, they questioned the significance of their labors, and that was the main weapons that they used, was ridicule and questioning. And you know what? Sometimes that could be more damaging than anything else that they could do. People can cause a lot of damage in a church just by ridicule, by gossip, by questioning. All you got to do is put a seed of doubt in somebody's mind, and you get them questioning the leadership, or questioning how they spend this money, or how they do this or do that. And all of a sudden it starts a seed of discontent. Well, Sanballat and Tobiah, they were those kinds of people. There was something interesting I learned about them, though. They're syncretistic. And what that means is they were a mixture of worshiping Yahweh along with other gods, other pagan customs. In other words, they kind of meshed it all in. They wanted to worship God, but they wanted to involve other forms of other gods. In church, I'm going to tell you, the more you study the Old Testament and you study some of these prophets and what the people of God were supposedly doing and worshiping other gods, my goodness, I see a lot of similarities in the way churches are going today. And people would argue with me on this. I'm sure there'd be a lot of pastors that would be upset with me on this. But I'll be honest with you, I get really brokenhearted and get mad sometimes when we try to intermingle false gods, false worship with the worship of God. When we try to bring in the world's kind of worship, when we try to bring in the world's kind of music that has nothing to do with God, that has nothing to do with worship, but because it's cool and because it draws people, listen, that's exactly what these people were doing. They were not honoring God. They were enemies of God. And they were trying to bring in the false worship and mix it in with godly worship, and they considered themselves godly people. But when in reality, they were enemies of Nehemiah. They were enemies of the people. Look down at verse 20, Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 20. So I answered them, and I said to them, to God of heaven will give us success. Therefore his servants will arise and build, but you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem. In other words, he's talking to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem. He's saying, look, we're going to rise and build. We're going to build this wall. We're going to do great things, but you have no portion here because you're not in this for the right reason. You're here. You're our enemies, basically. So look at this next slide. Nehemiah gives a godly response to the opposition, seen in three ways. Notice that. He did not speak of his own authority or the king's, but of the trust in the God of heaven. Nehemiah advised his people to ignore the ridicule and threats and simply work. And number three, he refused to compromise. He denied his opponents a share in the work, the land, or the worship of the Jewish community. So Nehemiah lays it right out there. We're going to work hard. We're going to do what God's called us to do. There's going to be opposition that's going to come, and it might even come from people from within our own camp. They might even look like Christians. They may talk like Christians, but their hearts are far from me. Listen, we've got to be on guard. we're gonna follow through with what God has called us to do. We're gonna go through with the vision that God has laid before us. But we're gonna have opposition, but we're gonna stay faithful. We're gonna be loving. We're gonna be caring. We're gonna be unified. And God is going to bless, and we're gonna see some great things happen. I hope that you've enjoyed the lesson tonight. It's been a shorter lesson for sure. Next week, we're going to be looking at lesson 4, the building for unity, a community that rebuilds the wall. And you can read about it in Nehemiah chapter 3, verses 1 through 32. Nehemiah chapter 3, verses 1 through 32. I hope you'll prepare for that lesson next week. I look forward to teaching again. God bless you, and I hope to see you on Sunday.